So, Joe, we're here today celebrating 20 years on this site for your tasting room. And one of the things that's always fascinated me about this event and thinking about it is that Ravenswood obviously has been around longer than 20 years. So tell us a little bit about the years previous to 20 years ago. Where were you in terms of a tasting room and in terms of Ravenswood previously from those 20 years?
Well, we started the winery in 1976, and I was working as an immunology research guy and didn't have a lot of money. I'd grown up loving wine and had learned a lot about wine early. Was living in Berkeley, was kind of a shakiness addict, was interested in food, was doing wine tastings. But I ran into a guy named Joseph Swan who was willing to teach me how to make wine. So from 72 into 76, I worked with him, and I made my first wine at Joe's Winery. And every year after that, I had to find a different winery to make wine at. Not because I was a particularly miserable guy to work with, but it seemed that every time I got involved with somebody, they were also expanding, and they just didn't have room to keep me. So the first year I was at Joe Swan's Winery. The second year I used space at Northwest Winery. The third year I went to Martini and Prati, which was a gigantic crushing station for Gallo. Stayed there for a couple of years, and then I went to Topos at Russian River Vineyard and shared space with him for a couple of years. So, in fact, one wine writer referred to me as the peripatetic winer. Sent me to my Funk and Wagnalls right away. Oh, what's that mean? It means nomadic, which is true, because it could never find
Right.
it. And then in 1981, we moved down to Sonoma, and we took over a rustic tin building, which I used to love to refer to as the gourmet toilet seat shop, because the people who were there before I arrived ran a woodworking shop, and they made oak toilet seats. So it just goes to show you can make wine anywhere if you're really desperate.
Right.
Let's just say that none of those places were places that I could have a tasting room or even would kind of invite people to. People came, but, it was like a bachelor pad in my toilet seat winery. There was cat hair around. We had a big old yellow cat, and there was paper. And in fact, I didn't actually have any employees until shortly after 1981. My first employee was a lady named Lynn Rogers, who was was the last person in the world, I think, that could do stenography. She was like an amazing, like over-the-top, capable person who basically turned my life upside down. She basically became kind of the work wife. She cleaned up the cat hair, the papers went away, the glasses we had were clean, so suddenly I could actually have people there. But it wasn't like anybody could find us. The county wouldn't let us have a sign, so nobody really knew where we were, so they had to really find us. But we grew, and we managed to develop more cash flow, and so by 1991, we were actually able to afford this place, which was originally the Benson Winery, and then it became the Haywood Winery. And then when Peter sold it, he sold it to us. So we were very fortunate to get it. And when we got it, we then modified the tasting room for a while because it got ridiculous. When people found out they could actually come and taste Ravenswood wines, they would show up in droves. And we would have, like people standing in what was our little box of the tasting room all the way out. And they passed their the credit card over to them. I want a case of Old Hill Ranch Zinfandel. We'd pass them back the case of Old Hill Ranch and their credit card, and they'd sign it, and they'd send it back up. Right. So we expanded the tasting room. So we moved around a lot. For that, and we grew. We were a very small winery that was started out specializing in Zinfandel at a time when people drank white wine 4-1 over red, and I always think I'm very fortunate to have had the French, around because, I started my winery in 1976, which is, of course, the year of the Judgment of Paris.
Exactly.
The French were very nice. They said that California wines were every bit as good as theirs. Thank you very much. And that didn't hurt us a bit. And then we also had the French paradox, another one of those French things, in which it was noted that the French who ate vast quantities of fat had very low incidence of heart disease, and that was probably because they drank red wine. And that has stood up over the test of time. So since I was an all red wine winery, and was stubbornly sticking to that, I was very fortunate. I ended up in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's things about a brand, you know you're successful and you're synonymous with the product that you're working with. And in many cases, to many people, if you say Ravenswood, they're going to say Zinfandel. And I'm just interested in how you came across to be working with Zinfandel. And I was also going to ask you about Joseph Swan, because I know that he was very influential when you were starting in the business.
Oh, yes.
So how did that all come together?
Well, I ran into Joe at a tasting, and we hit it off quite well, and I found out that he was really developing this small winery. He was still very much in the development phase of his winery when I met him.
This is in the Russian River area.
In the Russian River,
right?
Trenton, Forestville area.
Exactly, yeah.
And he was beginning to build his own building. I had some skills, so I volunteered to help him, and we talked a lot about wine and things like that. And so he basically taught me the nuts and bolts of winemaking. I learned how to prune a vine, learned which side of the barrel was up, and I learned how to drag a hose from point A to point B. Now, there was an added benefit that I hadn't calculated into my arithmetic when I got involved with Joe. Joe was very good friends with Andre Chelicek, and Andre was advising him. So I got really good advice from Andre as well. Now, Joe made Zinfandel, and we all know he made great Zinfandel. And
Absolutely.
His 1968 Zinfandel was legendary. When I tasted it in 1972, I went, wow, this is Zinfandel. This is fantastic. And
is that where the light went on for you?
Well, no, it actually had gone on a little earlier than that,
okay.
but this was just like proof. It was like, this was the proof that you could make great wine out of Zinfandel. And he made really interesting wines in 72 and 73, 74 when he was using the Taldeschi grapes. They were just remarkable, really interesting wines. So I was involved with all of those wines, but I had originally began looking at Zinfandel. Joe wanted to be Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Zinfandel was his practice wine, actually, and it turned out to be a wine that he got known for. In spite of his best endeavors to become known as for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Right.
But when I began investigating Zinfandel early, I had tasted some that were quite old, and in fact, Mondavi was doing Zinfandel in 1966 and using it, which had just begun the whole sort of modern era of winemaking. And so you tasted some of those wines, and I tasted wines from the 30s that were pretty terrific. The Larkmead 33 Burgundy, which was Zinfandel Petit Syrah wine, which was really interesting. But those wines were remarkable. But if you looked, and I'd grown up drinking European wines, and I said, well, what in California has the most European affect? And we were planting a lot of vines in those days that were, wide spacing, big trellisings like GDC, drip irrigated, frequently planted in flat areas. Typically places that you wouldn't think would grow great grapes if you were a European. And so what do European vineyards have in common? Well, they have some kind of special soil. They usually have some kind of special pruning system which is appropriate for the area. They have a crop level which is specified usually at 2.5 tons an acre or so. They get a lot of light and air into their grapes. And the vineyard has chosen for the site, that particular grape. The only grapes in California that fit the bill were old vine Zinfandel vineyards. Because they were old, they were low production, usually in that 2 to 2.5 ton an acre site. They were dry farmed like European vines. They had Goblet style trellising, or bush vines, or head trim, which were the same thing. And that carried the fruit around in a way that it got lots of light and air and didn't rot. It was perfect for the larger cluster size of things like Petit Syrah and Zinfandel, and Carignan, which are the three grapes that were involved in these vineyards. And they had been there for so long. The good vines were the ones that survived. The bad vines were the ones that had gotten taken out. So there was almost like a natural selection that took place. And these vines had to work their way through the Prohibition. So it really had a chance of making a wine that was really special, really interesting, and uniquely California. There was no place else in the world where this kind of combination of grapes. Zinfandel, obviously, is the core grape for that combination, but the other big three are Petit Syrah, Carignan, and Alicante Bouschet. There are other grapes that slip into these mixed flat field ones, but it's a California original. It's as original as Bordeaux, Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc is, as the 14 grapes that go in Chateauneuf de Pape are, as Chianti is with its splendid grapes. Grapes chosen by the people of that region to make the wine of that region which suited them the best. And so it's a unique, special one. So for me, I wanted to make one. And so I set out to do that. Unfortunately, my first attempts, though small, were successful. And people responded very well to the ones. And, that kept me going.
Sure.
Kept me encouraged.